That is definitely true. That every day is Thanksgiving. So we can say thank you for coming out, and hopefully we'll get to learn what I find to be an interesting topic, and I hope everybody else finds it interesting too. I do not mind. In fact, I love when people ask us questions, so please do not hesitate. Please, at any time, if there's a question that I'll get to later, I'll just say we'll get to it later, or if afterwards it needs to be discussed, I will try to discuss it with you. But please do not hesitate. And here we go. Today we're going to talk about shechita, or ritual slaughter. There's a lot of news about it all the time. Different places all throughout the world are trying to forbid it, or have forbidden it, and make it very problematic for Jews to live in those places. A lot of the times it seems that there's just not a lot of knowledge about it, and especially in comparison to the way they kill things in the non-Jewish slaughterhouses, it's a lot better. So let's talk about what is it? What is ritual slaughter? So first, whenever you talk about any topic, you always got to know what's the makor, what's the source. So where do we know that there is a concept of a proper way to kill an animal? So the pasuk says in the Torah, it's in the first source here. And when you are distanced from the place that Hashem chose to place His name there, meaning as the Jews grow and they are getting farther away from the Beis Hamikdash, right? Because the Beis Hamikdash is in central Israel, and many Jews live north, some live south, east and west. So sometimes it's very hard to get there. And you will slaughter from your cattle or from your sheep that Hashem gave to you, as I commanded you, and you will eat in your gates as you desire. So what does it say here? It says clearly, and you will shaft, v'zavachta means, and you will slaughter it, as I commanded you. So that should mean that there is a way of doing it, right? Like I commanded you. It's not just that, I did command you to shaft, because you won't find anywhere in the Torah that says you need to shaft an animal. It doesn't say that anywhere. And in fact, what's quite fascinating, there is no mention anywhere in the entire Torah how to shaft. Nowhere. You won't find it. You can look, it's not going to be there. Right? And here, it says clearly, Ka'asher tzivisicha, as I commanded you. Where was this command? Fair question?
Well, is there anything just about eating meat? Like just a general thing? Mm-hmm. And what does it say?
It says that you can eat meat.
Well, couldn't that be considered, I commanded you to eat meat? But
eating meat, yes, but how to kill the animal is the question. Where did Hashem command us? The Gemara asks this question, right? And the Gemara says, well, it doesn't exactly ask it, but it says, we see from here something. The Tanya, and we have a Bryce, the second source. Rabbi Omer, that's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the compiler of the Mishnah. He says, the pasuk that says, and you shall slaughter it as I commanded you. Milami, what does this come to teach you? Shenitztava Moshe alaveshet valakana, that Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded about the esophagus and the trachea. Al rov echad ba'of, and the requirement to cut the majority of one of those two things by a bird, and Valrov Shnai to the Hema, and the requirement to cut the majority of both of them by an animal. So here you see clearly that it says that it's not in the Torah. It was a direct Masorah tradition from God to Moshe all the way to us. All the way to us. And that's why all the Torah has to say is, as I commanded you, because they knew, because it was given to them directly from Moshe, from God. And the Torah Tamima here, he says, Kahn Ramza Lanu Torah Mufurash. Here there is an explicit hint, Al Klolius Inyan Torah Shabbal Peh. It's on your papers, the third source. That on the concept of Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral Torah, Shenimsru LaMoshe, that it was given over to Moshe, Pirtei HaMitzvos, the details of the mitzvah, Kivakubam Etzleinu, as it's accepted by us. So here, we have a clear indication that there is not only just the written Torah, but there was an oral Torah that was passed down. There are many other indications that an oral Torah is necessary for For example, a very common thing that men will do all the time is wear tefillin. Nowhere in the Torah does that word tefillin show up, right? The only word that it's connected with is totafos, but it doesn't have any of the halachas. Doesn't tell you that it has to be black. Doesn't have to tell you that it has to be square. Doesn't have to tell you any of these things, right? There are many of these examples, but here it's very clear. Hashem says in the Torah that you have to slaughter the animal like I commanded you. There's no clear commandments, and we still have it. So the answer is that we have a direct tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu, directly from God, exactly how to do it. Okay, so that's the source. Now, next question is what is required for a proper shechita? What is it? So let me first just introduce you to some things here. First of all, this is a sefer. The sefer is called the Simul Chadasha. In America, this is the main sefer in learning Shechita. It's written by Rabbi Alexander Sender Shor. He lived in the middle to late 1700s. He was a Lunkach Chassid, and this is like the sefer. In fact, when I learned how to be a shochet, this was the only thing that my teacher told me to do. He said, buy this, learn this, and you'll be tested on this. And he said, and if any big rabbi comes and asks you a question, and you say that the Simul Chadasha says this, and you show him, that's the end of the discussion. There's no more discussion. If the Simul Chadasha says something, that's it. So and in fact, it's written in here, it's got on the top, it's divided into 30 days, because ideally a shochet should continuously review every 30 days what they're doing, because we're people, so we don't always remember. So a shochet, it's not just like somebody in a regular slaughterhouse, they're just killing and killing. It's very careful. A shochet has to be very, very on top of his game, and not just anybody can become a shochet. In fact, I read in a biography about Rabbi Pinchas Teitz, who is the Rav in Elizabeth. He came from Salbudka, and there was once a reporter that came to his office and came in and he said, "Listen, I want to talk to you about ritual slaughter." And he was prepared for this. He had all his anatomy books and had all the pages down to the line in the book of where to talk to him. And he brought the reporter to the slaughterhouse. Now, he was the Rav of the entire town, and they had a slaughterhouse in those days. This was a bunch of years ago. And they had a slaughterhouse, and his job as being the Rav HaMakshir, the one who says that it's all kosher, he can come in at any time, totally random, whenever he wants. So he had his stuff in the car. They just jumped in. They went. Nobody knew he was coming. Nothing. He just walks in, and he shows him around, and he sees the shoftim, and everybody's, they're checking their knives. I'll show you that in a minute. And they, at the end of this whole experience, the reporter said, the difference between the non-kosher slaughterhouse and the kosher slaughterhouse is that the non-kosher slaughterhouse is just like a butcher shop. They just were, killing and nobody cared for much. But in the slaughterhouse, for the Jewish slaughterhouse, it was an art. The shoftim took very care. They couldn't shecht too many times, because then it would get their arm tired, so they would have to sit down and take a break. They couldn't necessarily just check their knives. They would give it to somebody else. They would make sure that it was okay. They had to make sure the knives were extremely sharp. They would let the animal face the wall only so that they wouldn't see anything. There was a lot of care. And it wasn't just like, willy-nilly and anything goes. It was very, very careful. Okay, so that's the Simul Chadasha I'm a little bit about. And then these really are the main tools of a shochet. We have here just a sharpening block. There are two sides to it. This is the one I have. I'm sure there are many other types. This one is rougher. That's in case you have any nicks in the knife, which we'll talk about. You want to get it out. So that'll shave off parts of the metal of the knife, and it'll get rid of the nick. And then this side is to smooth it out, because you want it to also be smooth to make sure that it's a clean cut as much as possible. Now the main tool is a shechita knife. Here's your knife. Okay, this is only good for birds because it's too small for other animals. Maybe it could be for a small animal, but I doubt it. It's a little small. This, it's kind of a simple knife, and we'll talk about why it looks as it is, because it in fact helps us keep all of the halachos of shechita in a pretty amazing way. And you have here, obviously, this is dull, this is dull, only this side is sharp. And my teacher said that, if a shochet doesn't like the person who's checking his knife, so I'll hand it to him like this. And he said, crazy enough, I can't even believe that there was a student who would do this. But he had a student, he was teaching how to be a shochet, and he could not get his knife sharp. And just to show him that his knife was totally not sharp, my teacher, very well experienced, he's the bird expert in the OU, Rabbi Chaim, like you can look him up, he said that he grabbed the blade to show him that it was totally dull, there was nothing going. And then the student, I can't even believe he thought of this, so Rabbi Loiki, gave him his knife, right? I'm sure like this, and he grabbed the blade.
Oh.
Yeah, so he said that was a quick trip call to Hatzal. So don't, it's we try as much as shoftim to keep our knives very separate, left aside, and because of that, there are different halachos. Muktzah, for example, that comes up on Shabbos, that is muktzah machmas kifsarim kiss. Yeah?
I apologize because I stepped down just for a second. Is that the only type of blade, the only shape that's used?
We'll talk about a little bit about shapes of knife. Please remind me if I don't. But we will, hopefully we'll talk about it right now. Okay, so first, what's required for proper shechita? So obviously a person, as we said, not everybody can be a shochet. So here, the Simcha Chadasha, I brought a source right here, fourth source on the first page. It says, a person, a Jewish person who wants to become a shochet, this is the rules. First, he needs to learn all of the laws. You got to know the laws. Now, in my case, in order to pass the test, you had to get 90 and above. If you got anything below 90, you failed, and you needed to do it again. That was the first. You had first three. There was 3 tests split up into 3, and then afterwards is the next part we'll talk about. And after you are an expert in the laws, you should not shech by yourself. Shemi is aleph. Maybe he will faint. And now he explains what iluf is. And it's a loss of feeling because of his weakness of heart, meaning he's squeezing around blood. You're also down. And he'll actually ruin the shchita without realizing. You should shecht in front of a wise person, meaning somebody who knows what they're doing, a bunch of times, until he is set in front of him that he's done it properly 3 times in a row, that he both has proper feeling and technique, and he's not going to pass out. Now, for me personally, the way I went through this process was my teacher, he brought us to a slaughterhouse. There are many places, now not here. It took me a long time to find, but we'll talk about it later. There aren't so many places that have live chickens here, but in New York, there are lots of them. And so he would take us to one of these places that have live chickens that they would kill for people, and for fresh chicken. And we would go in the back, and he would bring us a bunch of chickens. We'd buy them, and we would practice that way. And then after doing that a few times, then I went to a different rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Spivak, and he tested me, and that's how I have my Kabbalah. Fine. So then so that is the basics. You have to know the laws, and you have to get tested that you're not going to faint. In fact,
why would anybody go into this if they even had any queasiness about blood? I mean, what would it be crazy?
It's a great question. And it's a great question. I'll explain to you what I'm about to say. I think will answer that a little bit. Right? So me, for example, I am only certified in slaughtering birds.
I'm just going to answer.
I am not certified in slaughtering small animals or big animals, including lambs or cows. Right? And there's a very good reason for that. Is because a chicken, average, let's say, is about 3 to 5 pounds. That's, this big. A lamb is this big. And a cow is very large. If you've ever been by a cow, you don't even realize how big they are sometimes until you're standing next to the thing. And you're like, wow, this thing is big. Okay? So let's say a cow weighs 2,000 pounds. Okay, with bones and everything. The quantity of blood in a chicken is not that much. Right? If you get a nice cut in your hand and it's bleeding, and you got to put pressure on it, and it's just gushing, that's probably just about the same amount of blood that you're going to be seeing in a typical shechita. It's not that much. But as you get bigger, into the bigger animals, you actually need a special certification. I'm not certified at all. They have to test me that I'm not going to pass out on the smaller animals first, and then the bigger animals. right? So it's very well possible that a person isn't queasy. Blood, no problem. He's just never done it, and he didn't even realize that it would be a problem. So that's very well could be why it happens.
How about vice versa? If somebody's certified for Bahim Adasa, is automatically?
Automatically. You couldn't become certified for a behema, for a big animal like a cow, without being certified for a bird. Even though the act of killing the animal is the exact same thing. There's really no difference. It's just, I mean, this is way too small for a cow. You have, probably about this big for a cow. Okay, that's about the size of the knife from the handle. Okay, and for a small animal, maybe about till here, right? So it's very large. So you really also have to get used to holding the things properly and steady, because you don't want to shake like this, because if you're shaking with a huge knife, it's not a good idea. You're not going to get a good cut. Yeah.
But you could observe first before going through the training to see
Absolutely.
if you have the stomach for it.
100%.
See if it suits you.
Absolutely. I definitely believe that is correct. Besides that, sometimes though doing it is a little different. You have to, as a moil once told me, when you're dealing with children, at that point you can't have rahmanas. You got to do it right, because otherwise something is going to go wrong. So it's the same thing with the animal. You have to know exactly what you're doing, and you have to set, I'm going to do it right, because otherwise, forget it, you're going to mess up. And that sometimes can be difficult, right? Yeah.
You're certified on chickens, so you're also certified on ducks and turkey.
Yes.
Turkey can be much larger.
Yes. For ducks and turkeys, yes, I am, except doves. Doves is a unique animal because their anatomy is different. The dove does not, typically in a chicken, you'll see a picture in it, they have what we call the two simanim. Those are the esophagus and the trachea. They're in the front, right? So you have, I think this is the trachea and this is the esophagus. So it's somewhere about here, and this is the head of the chicken. So they're like this. In a dove, it's actually on the side. So it takes extra training to be able to properly pull them to the front so you can properly give a cut. And many times you'll mess it up. I've never actually chefted a dove. I've chefted other birds besides chickens. I've chefted chickens, a chukar partridge, and a quail. But I've never yet chefted a dove. Next time I'm in New York, I'm going to have to bother my teacher about it because he owes me. Well, especially because doves, I'm going to put this out there right now so everybody should know. Contrary to popular opinion today, there are no chickens in the base of English. None. Zero. Not one chicken. It's only turtle doves. Tor ben Yonah. Right? So those are the ones that are shechted in the base of English, and in fact, it's called malika, so it's a whole different process, but we're not going to talk about that today. Yeah.
Why would anyone say that there are chickens in the Beit HaMikdash?
I can't tell you why. But what I can tell you is when I mentioned to people that I'm a shochet, oh, so you're like getting ready for the base of Mikdash to shech the chickens and stuff, right? I'm like, no. No, not at all. Okay. I am getting ready for the base of Mikdash because I need to know how to shech, but not to shech chickens. Okay. So now, let's talk a little bit about the actual act of killing the animal. So, we spoke about that the shochet needs to know the laws very carefully. There are 5 primary laws of Hilchos Shechita. And different shochtim, they have different ways to remember. It's a mnemonic. There are 2 of them. One is the one I was taught as the Ashkenazi, and he told us that the Sephardi one is a different one. Asei chad. That means make it sharp. Right? And those letters make up the Rashi tables, or the acronym for the 5 main laws of Shechita. And then the other one is Chashdei. You have to suspect him. That's the Sephardi one. Suspect him. And that also makes up the 5 main laws. So we're going to go through them now. The first one is called Ikur. That's with an ayin, Ikur. So there are 2 types of Ikur. The word is, the shoresh, the root word is ayin kuf reish, which can mean uproot, or the root, or something of that nature. And there are really 2 issues that exist with this law. One is a dislocated one of the simanim. Again, we have to shech. Ideally, we're going to try to cut the esophagus and the trachea totally. Right? By a bird, you only have to cut the majority of one of them. Okay? So, however, it has to be properly connected to the body. If it's improperly connected to the body, then you can't properly kill it, and it's not a kosher animal, even if it doesn't matter. You can't eat it. So even if you would kill it afterwards, it doesn't change its kosher status, and it's going to be a problem.
How is it how would it be wrong? Like, how is it improperly connected?
Good question. So the animals, obviously, they don't, just sit there twiddling their thumbs. So sometimes if an animal would get into a fight and it would get a wound, or if it would fall, right, and it would hit something, it could dislocate the, it could rip the skin, it would rip the trachea or the esophagus partially. That would be a problem. Another way that it could happen is when a shochet is trying to properly hold the bird, which is very important. That's one of the most important things. The cutting of it is very simple. That's easy. Most people can cut. But when you hold it, you have to hold it very strong and carefully, because then the bird is going to relax. Because when it knows that it's in total, when it cannot move and it's not going anywhere, it relaxes. If you have it and you're not holding it in a proper way, it tries to fight you. Okay, so when you hold it properly, sometimes you can pull a little too much, and you could pull it out that way. So those are a few different things. Or if somebody is trying to feel where it is to make sure that they have it in a good hold, because then you should be able to feel it. Because again, the trachea you can feel on yourself, right? The trachea is harder. You can feel it. It's not very soft. It's a harder tissue. It's Dr. Rutland can explain that.
Cartilage.
Cartilage, right? That was the word I was looking for. It's cartilage, and not unlike the esophagus, which is a muscle. So
Smooth muscle.
Smooth muscle, right? Okay, so that's one. The other one is if it's ripped. Now that's why we have to be very careful with our knives, because you can rip it by actually. Who here has serrated knives, right? Which is easier to cut with, serrated or not serrated? Serrated. It's a lot easier to cut with serrated because it just rips open the part, right? And that's what we don't want to do. We want to make sure that it is not serrated at all. And that's why we check the knife 12 times. Now this is just reality of all knives. You have, right, here's the sharp part. It's basically a triangle. So if you have a triangle, that means you have two sides and the sharp point. Okay? So whenever you check the knife, I'm just going to show you right now. So you hold the knife carefully. You want to make sure that it's steady. Okay? And then you take a fingernail, right? I know some people who check it this way, but I'm used to it I use this finger right here, my ring finger. Okay, so that was one time. So you want to check that 12 times before. And we learned that from a source in the Torah. The Torah says, Ushchat tem by the Akedah. It says, and you should check, but zeh is, with this, zeh is the numerical value of 12. So that's the way you remember. So you have to check it 12 times.
How frequent?
So, okay, good question. What? So, ideally, after every single shechita, you should check it. Okay? That's the ideal. Now, there are certain times that you're not going to do that for practical reasons. One of them, for example, explicitly mentioned in the Simcha Chadasha, is Erev Yom Kippur. It used to be, now here I don't think they have done it yet, but in many places they have live kaparos, where you take chickens and twirl it over your head, and then you chef the bird and give it to poor people who are in need. So, in old days, or in other bigger communities, you can have hundreds, if not thousands, of birds to be shechting now. It's very tight on scheduling and very difficult. In Chicago, I know the Chabad over there, they do it from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the morning, Erev Yom Kippur. So, I mean, you're so tight on time that if you're going to have to sit and check the knife after every single one, you're not going to do a good job. You're just not going to check well. It's not worth your time to check it. So what they do, I hope, I've never been there because I decided that was way too late for me and rather have a good Yom Kippur. But so what they do instead is every single group of people, they have one group of person with 5 chickens, so they'll check it at the end of the 5 chickens. This person has 7 chickens at the end of 7 chickens. Today on mass scale, they're doing obscene numbers of shchita a day. I don't know exactly how often they do it, but I have heard before that it is more worth their monetary while to throw out an entire round of chickens than it is to check the knife after every single time. It costs too much money. So my guess is that they have multiple knives ready and checked. So they'll give it to the shochet. He'll check a few times and then he'll pass it back. And then they'll check it that way, and yeah.
I just wanted to confirm what you were saying. I went and visited the Empire plant, and they have about 20 shachting ones. And they have one particular person who's going around with he has a briefcase with knives, and he's giving them new knives that were checked by another team of people because he's constantly replenishing. Because in Empire, this goes back a few years ago, they were shechting 100,000 birds a day.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, so I was told that in besides Empire, there's another big one in Postville, Iowa. They do 70,000 a day, besides 1,000 head of cattle that they do.
You met my brother-in-law?
Yeah.
What is, do you think, this is supposed to be done by a person or whatever, some kind of Israeli technology that can take the place? Would it be allowable?
A machine?
Or that's one. And
Okay.
when you were just checking with your fingernail, what are you checking? Because you're not touching with your finger. Are you checking that there's a slit in it, and then you expect there to be a dozen slits if you're checking it a dozen times? When you just scale the blade, what are you looking for?
A nick. So if you have, for example, look at your serrated knife. A serration is basically this. You have a dip in the knife, right? And part of the metal is sticking up. That's these parts. So if, this is obviously on the macro scale, you can, microscope. But, when you rub your nail over it, if you work at it enough, you'll detect that there's the dip. And you'll feel that dip and you'll say, oh, there's a problem right there. And usually, if I do find something, I don't ever depend on just the first time. I'll do it again and again and double check that there's actually something there. Because sometimes if you've shechted, there could be just some grease. Just stuff gets stuck on it very easily, and it's sometimes very unclear whether it's actually a nick or not, and the difference is whether it's a kosher bird or not. Yeah.
How often do you wash the
I try after every single one. After every shechita, because then the blood gets stuck in it.
Is there a special process to washing it too?
Yeah, water. You also want to use some soft material to make sure that you can rub off the things. Yeah.
If it's got a nick in it or something, do you just sharpen it?
Yeah. Yeah. I would. That's what I would use this stone for. If it's a really bad nick, so then I would use this. And if it's not very bad and it's very small, I would use this thing. Yeah.
Maybe does a woman qualify halachically to be a shochet if she goes through? She could handle the knife.
Excellent question. So, technically, yes. Practically, no, because there's a custom for a long time, at least in Ashkenazi circles. I can't speak for Sephardi or Taimani circles, that women have not shechted, and by fact that women could have shechted for hundreds of years, and they have not. So therefore, the custom has become that they do not. Especially if it's on a mass scale where you're talking about, again, today is obscene numbers, but even in the times of the Simla Chadasha, where he was, the mid to late 1700s, so he also said that especially for a person who is the town shochet, so then for sure a woman should not shecht, because we would be nervous again with the queasiness. Okay, yeah.
The difference between us and the male, they can have nicks in the blade, right?
I do not know. I have been told that the halal, the Muslim population will accept shechita, but I can tell you for sure that we cannot accept the halal shechita.
Right, and I guess I'm curious which you don't have to go into, what the differentiation between the two. Like, one is acceptable to one is not acceptable to the other. So this must be a stricter form. There must be reasons.
I'm sure there is. Personally, I have never researched what the requirements are of halal. I just do not know. Okay, so that's the first one. That's ikra. Next one is shehiyah. This one is really easy. Probably the most difficult one to make sure that you don't do. okay, is you are not allowed to have any delay in the shechita. That means once the knife, as my teacher said, once the knife touches the neck, you have to be cutting. If you're not cutting, it's a bad shechita. It doesn't matter how long you stop. It doesn't matter what caused you to stop. It doesn't matter nothing. It's done. Finished. It's over. Right? So that means once it cuts, you have to go, and then you remove it and you're done. There's no in between. There's no nothing. Right? So if you go like this, no good. No
What
good.
happens to the animal?
What?
So where does the animal end up if it's not a
So if it's a not kosher animal, so then you would have to kill the animal and make sure that it's left separate from the other ones. That would be what you have to do. It happens sometimes, so you have to be very careful. Okay, so that's pretty easy. You can't have any delay. Okay. Hagrama, that's the next one. Hagrama means that you have to shecht it in its proper place. And in animals, each animal is a little different, but for the most part, actually across the board, if you shecht in the middle of the neck, you're fine, right? There are a bunch of details about where exactly on each of the trachea and the esophagus, each one is different, how high you can go, how low you can go, what happens if you shecht in different places, a little too detailed. But if you got in the middle, it's it's for sure good. Now, the obvious question that people talk about all the time is a giraffe. Contrary to the popular idea that I grew up with, giraffe is totally kosher. We know exactly how to shecht it. There is no problem with the giraffe. If you want to pay, what I was told, $35,000 for a giraffe, please let me know. I know many people who would be very interested, and I will hook you up without a problem. I was told by somebody who personally has a personal relationship with Rabbi Ari Greenspan and Rabbi Ari Zivotofsky. You can look them up. Actually, he's a dentist doctor, I should say. Dr. Ari Greenspan and Rabbi Ari Zivotofsky. They do a lot of these fun, interesting things. You can look them up on the internet, Halachic Adventures. I heard them say that they were once called by the Ramat Gan Zoo in Israel, that there was just a stillborn of a giraffe, and if they wanted to, they could come dissect it now. And it was Chol Moed Sukkos. They said, could it wait until after Sukkos? They said, well, you can either come tomorrow or it's going to the lions. So they went, they dissected it, and they said that basically it's a big cow. That's basically what it is. Unlike some people said, it's a totally split hoof, no question. They have pictures, and it's totally kosher.
There's one problem. Giraffes, I just read this week, giraffes are about to be put on the endangered species list.
Oh, that's why it's $35,000.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's $35,000. But here, I just took a few pieces of information here about the giraffe's neck, just so you can see. It's from the San Diego Zoo website. I thought that was a pretty reliable source. It says here, giraffes. It's at the bottom of the first page, very bottom. A giraffe's 6-foot neck weighs about 600 pounds. How many bones are there in a giraffe's neck? Just like humans, giraffes has 7 neck vertebrae. For giraffes, however, each one can be over 10 inches long. Okay, so that gives you a lot of room to shack without problem. Without problem.
And a big ladder.
What?
And a big ladder.
Yeah, I don't know how they would probably put it on the ground to shecht it. That would probably be the easiest. You also have to worry about things like that. We can actually discuss that in a minute. About what to do with big animals. Even a cow is a problem. You have to deal with, again, it's just such a big animal. How do you properly deal with it?
How do you keep it from moving?
Sorry,
Don't you have a son that?
yeah, we'll talk. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a second.
How do you keep a large animal from moving?
We'll talk about that in one moment. When we talk about drasa, we will talk about that. Okay, so chalada. That's the next one. So that means you cannot have the knife hidden at all. So now, what does that mean practically? Right? So here's my knife. When I'm shechting and I have the animal in my hand, I have to make sure that I can see it the entire time. Right? So it's like this. Right? You have to make sure that I can see it the entire time. So wearing a tie, not suggested. Right? If it falls on there, okay, no. Not the biggest deal, but not suggested. So if you look in slaughterhouses, you'll see all the time the rabbis, they're wearing these big things covering their beards, and they have the big almost like science coats. It's not laboratory coats. That's the one. Thank you. It's not only for sanitation; it's also for the halacha. You don't want anything to cover that knife in the area that you're shechting while you're shechting. Okay, so now drasa. This is another simple one to explain. Definitely more complicated and takes a lot of practice to make sure that you don't do it. It means you cannot shecht through force. The best example for this is a tomato. Most of you guys, I'm sure, have cut tomatoes. Yeah? Now, when you have the tomato on the cutting board and you have your knife, have you ever had the tomato just sort of go, yeah?
Yeah. Dull knife.
Very juicy, dull knife, and instead of cutting through it, you just smashed it. Yeah? And sometimes if you push a little bit, it'll cut through the skin surface, and then you'll be able to cut the rest of it. Sometimes it just doesn't work too well. That would be drasa. That's exactly what drasa is you're cutting through force. You're not allowed to do that. What you have to do is you have to cut, and it will cut. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't put any downward force, because obviously you have to guide the knife lower for it to keep cutting, because if you just keep it over here, it's not going to cut either. Right? So you can guide it, but you cannot force it. Right? So, as my teacher said, if you're holding the animal and you're cutting and all of a sudden you're down here, that's a problem. Right? You should be like this, in total control. You're not forcing nothing. You're just in total control. Okay? Now, that part, that is not the more difficult part. Now, this one is a real problem. It'll sound simple, but imagine everybody close their eyes for a second and imagine themselves, you have a fork and a knife in your hand. Okay? And you have a piece of meat, okay? And you're going to cut the steak, and now you're going to take it, and you're going to cut. What did you just move forward on top of the knife? I can guarantee most of you moved your finger. Most people, when they're cutting with a knife, they put the finger on the knife, and they guide, and they push. That is usser. You just made a treif animal.
Wow.
Okay? No pushing down. So you have to make sure you hold like this. Right? Make sure. That's one of the more complicated ones. Not because it's so difficult, it's just we're so used to cutting. So when I was doing shechting much more often, I was very, very careful that whenever I would use a knife, I would never put my finger on the knife like that, because otherwise it's just too hard.
But you're getting to that habit because you're doing it often.
Yes, correct. So one has to be very, very, very careful. Okay, now if one did, and one knows that they did not force down, it's not a problem. But again, that's something you don't want to get into. Okay, now we're going to get into the issue of holding and controlling the animals. Okay, so this is one of those issues that you have to be very careful with, because if the animal is not in your total control, it will go all over the place, and you might push extra with force, and that would be a problem. Another problem is if you're shechting, the typical way of shechting is down like this. If you're shechting this way, which is also kosher, okay, but you're going to be worried that that the weight of the animal's head is actually putting too much force on the knife. So we want to always make sure that the animals are we're in total control of the animal, and they are relaxed, and we're in charge. So there are a few different options. For a bird, you just hold it in your hand. That's one option. They don't do that on the lines. I think they hang it by one of their feet, and they hold the head. Or somebody else is holding it and they bring it to the shofet. That I've also heard. For that, a bird is relatively easy to control. Also, a lamb, they're pretty small. You can hold it down and you can just shech down. But a 2,000-pound cow, what are you going to do? So I've heard, again, I've never been to a place where they've shechted cows, that there are two methods that they use. They either hang it up by a leg, and then they are in control of it, or what the bigger places do, this is very expensive, obviously, the engineer can talk about that, how expensive it is, but they have a hydraulic machine that holds the animal, lifts up its head like this, and flips it. So right there are two ways. They can either just hold up the head so it's not going anywhere, and it opens up the neck, makes it relatively easy, so then you can cut up that way. It's in total control, that head's not moving. Or they flip the cow upside down, where it's now in the air on its back, and then they can shech down. Yeah. So that is how they control the animals to make sure that they are not moving and we are in total control so that we don't have to worry about this problem. Okay, so now, let's go back to the knife for a second.
How would they have done that before they had that?
I can't tell you how they did it before. Probably they tied up the animal in a certain way, but I can tell you is in here. In the Beis Hamikdash,
There were rings.
exactly. In the Beis Hamikdash, what they would do is they would force the animal down to the ground somehow, and then they had a hard ring that they would connect on both sides of the neck, and that way the animal couldn't get up. And then they would kill the animal sort of on the floor. They had it was the tabos, that they would call it a ring, and it would be locked into the floor, and the animal would not be able to move. So that's what they did in the Beis Hamikdash. Again, I can't, I don't know how they did it in the old days.
Why don't they use a tranquilizer?
That's what I was going to ask. Why don't they drug them?
Good question, and I don't know the answer, but what I can tell you is that here's some ideas about it. I just saw Chub from Moshe about this. He says, one, you might have to be worried about trephos, which is a little bit beyond my knowledge base. I know some basics, but not all of the details. There are certain things, there are many different, this is the basic idea. There are certain sicknesses, wounds in an animal that no matter what you do to that animal, it is treif. It will never be kosher. And if it gets sick, if it has certain wounds, like for example, holes in the lungs. You've heard of glot meat? Glot meat is making sure that there are no holes in the lungs. That's what it's about. So certain medicines, certain injections, certain anything that you're adding outside of the natural could cause any of these problems, and you would have to know that it doesn't. That's one issue that can come up. That's one issue that can come up. So that would be my best guess is why they wouldn't use it. Okay, and just, yeah. Okay, good. Okay, fine. So now let's get back to the knife for a second. So we had 5 laws of shchita. We had ikur, which is making sure that it's not dislocated or cut. So therefore we check the knife. Shehiyah, hagrama, making sure it's in the middle. Now, this knife is built specifically, unlike most knives in your kitchen, none of them are squared off. So the reason that it's squared off is to make sure that it's very difficult to get it in between anything. See this? It's not going to go in between my fingers. If there's a point, right, like this, much easier. Yeah? But, so therefore, this helps prevent the problem of challah. It's very difficult to get in. Also, obviously, you have to make sure that it's sharp. That helps the problems of shehiyah and ikur. And hagrama, you just have to be careful, and the same thing with drasa. And if it's sharp, then you don't have to worry too much about putting too much pressure. Okay, so that's the way the knife helps us fulfill all the laws. Now, what animals need shchita? Because not every animal needs shchita. I see where you're getting it. So we'll go quickly. Animals and birds need shchita. Fish and grasshoppers do not need shchita. Yes, grasshoppers, there is a kosher type of grasshopper. We, in general, people, us Ashkenazim do not have the Masorah. We don't have the tradition on which one is correct. So therefore, we don't eat it. But there are still some people from Teiman who do have the tradition, and they still do eat it. Whether you can depend on the Masorah of those Jews in Teiman to eat a grasshopper or not. I have had different answers from the big Rabbanim, and I leave that to Rabbi Fish to answer for you guys. So,
I think the local is that the bird also have that Masorah.
We'll get to that in a second.
So does turkey have a Masorah?
We'll get to that. Excellent question. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Don't worry. On Thanksgiving, how could I forget? Okay, so here, if you want, you can look here. I gave you the source in Sefer Achinuch. I would have read through the whole thing, but we're already getting a little bit late. So you'll see there's sources. Every single one of these animals that requires shchita is sourced in the Torah, and the ones that don't is also from the Torah. So that's all clear from Psukim. Fine. Now, obviously, now we're going to get on to what Arya was mentioning. So every child you're in their grade school, they come home one day and they say, I know how to tell that it's a kosher animal. How do you know? It has split hooves and what else? Or
double
fish. Nobody's mentioning fish. It has fins and scales. Fins and scales, right? What major area of food did we not cover? Birds. Right? Nothing about birds. Yeah? So this is a major, major difference between birds and animals. Birds, there is no mention anywhere in the Torah of signs that make a bird kosher. They only mention, I believe it's 24, non-kosher birds. Therefore, theoretically, if we knew with definitive knowledge what the 24 birds in the Torah that are forbidden are, then we can eat any other bird in the entire world. Okay? But due to the fact that we don't, and this has not been a recent phenomenon, this is a very old phenomenon, it doesn't work that way. So here we have a Mishnah towards the bottom of the second page. It's from the Gemara in Chulin. It talks about this issue. Right? Simani behema v'chaya nemru min haTorah. The signs of a kosher animal are discussed in the Torah. Simani of lo nemru. And the signs of a kosher bird were not mentioned. Aval amru chachamim, the sages said, kol of hadores tameh. A trampling bird is not kosher. What that means is a very large discussion. Some say that you have to grab it from the air and eat it. Some say that you have to force down the animal and peck at it like that. Some say you have to bring the food to your mouth, right? It's not, just because an animal eats another animal does not make it a dores. That's not true. Proof positive is ducks. Ducks eat fish, and they are still kosher, okay? So just because it eats another animal doesn't mean anything. Fine. So kol sheyesh lo etzva yisera. So anything that has an extra finger, that's also a little bit of a debate what it means. But you'll see if you look at a chicken, it has like this extra spur at the top of its leg. It has 1, 2, 3 toes, and then one in the back, and then on the top of its leg, it's got this extra spur. So that is one opinion on what it means. The zefek is a pouch. It's on the esophagus, where some of the food, instead of going straight down into the gizzard, it goes into this pouch almost to save the food for later, and it holds it in there, and then eventually, if it needs it, then it forces it out, and then it can eat. Because again, they're more scavengers. Chickens specifically, they're scavengers, so they don't necessarily always have the food available. So they Hashem made it that way that they have this pouch that they can save stuff for later. Of the kurkavanu niklaf, that's the gizzard, the pupik. The gizzard, if you have the gizzard, it's a muscle, and on the inside of the muscle, there's this membrane. When you cut it open, and then if you can pull it off with your hand, which I can, it's very easy. If you've ever seen a shechita, it's very easy to do. So you pull it off with your hand. Those are the kosher. Then it's kosher. Tahor. It's a kosher bird. So you see here, we have 3/4 signs of a kosher bird. It can't be a dores, can't be a trampler. It has to have this extra appendage, this spur or whatever exactly that is, and it has to have a pouch for extra food, and it has to have its gizzard stomach peelable by hand. Now, interestingly enough, ducks do not have a zefek. They don't have this extra pouch for food, but they're still kosher because, again, as we said, if we know a bird is for sure kosher, so then we don't necessarily, these aren't signs that tell me this is what a kosher bird is. These are signs to give you indication that it is probably a kosher bird. Okay, now, what ended up happening is for a while, people would just depend on these symbols and they would find birds. What ended up happening is people made mistakes. So because of this, Ashkenazim specifically, the Ramah Paskins in the Shulchan Aruch, that you cannot eat a bird without a Masor. If you don't have a tradition from person to person that a bird is kosher, it's not. So you have to assume that it is not kosher, and therefore my teacher, for example, is working very, very, very hard to try to find a tradition on every single bird that he possibly can, because a lot of the old world shoftim where they had experience with shechting the birds aren't around anymore because everything is in the slaughterhouse where it's just fed to you. So now the question is, what about turkey? Turkey is an American bird. It was never in Europe until at least after Columbus, right? When they brought it back.
How many birds do we know about today that are kosher?
I don't know. I can text to find out though. I'll see if he answers, but it's an interesting question. I'm not sure. So, and some birds it's a machlokes of whether they're kosher or not. Like a muscovy duck is a machlokes in the world. Okay, but so what happened with turkey? Basically, turkey is widely accepted across all Jews that it's kosher. Sephardim don't really have an issue because they can depend on the signs of a kosher bird that were given by Chazal. Ashkenazim have a much bigger problem. Why in the world are we allowed to eat turkey? So there's a whole article about it. Rabbi Ari Zivtovsky wrote a nice article called "Are Turkeys Kosher?" So here, this is what I quoted for you here on this page. It's the third page, I believe. The top of the third page is just a direct quote from his article. This was the logic that I heard from my teacher quoting Rabbi Saul Belsky, who was the Satzal, was the posek for the OU. And he said, basically what this says is, it's true that we require a Masorah, but since basically every single person accepts it to be kosher, and it has been that way for so long, once that is true, you would need definitive proof that it is not a kosher bird to remove it. So it's as if we have a Masorah. Okay?
So how do you become a Masorah?
That's a good question, but that's a after the fact question. It's a b'diavad. Once it happens, it's basically what it says here, right? The rule that birds are eaten only if a Masorah exists, coupled with the fact that the origins of a particular Masorah unknown, is insufficient reason to declare an accepted bird unacceptable. We don't know how they got the Masorah. It could very well be that they did have a Masorah. How? We have no idea. But what we do know is that it's basically, right, it's accepted almost everywhere. So he says, however, the vast majority of the Jews have accepted it as kosher. Once that has happened, unless there is overwhelmingly compelling evidence to declare not kosher, such as that it is found to be truly a doreis, it cannot now be declared non-kosher. Okay? So now, however, intellectual honesty, there are very big Rabbanim who do not eat turkey. It's in the name of the Shlah, they say. He writes that it's not written in any of his writings, but the family of the Shlah has a tradition not to eat turkey. I've heard that Rav Hershel Schachter does not personally eat turkey. It's known about the Kamenetsky family, that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky did not eat turkey. Apparently, in his article, he mentions that there was a Russian family named Frankel, that they didn't eat turkey. Yes, correct. He discusses that also. Rav Shmuel has a whole hesed for that in the article. If you want to see, yeah, I heard that. Because your grandfather saw it kill another animal or something?
He saw it be doreis on his farm. So he said, it's a doreis, so we don't eat turkey. For this specific reason.
So I was just curious how many times that's happened. How many times did he see it be a doreis?
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody claimed that they saw a time ago also be doreis.
Okay.
He's not alive anymore. 150 years ago.
Okay, good. So you found. Don't worry about it. If you're not eating turkey, it's fine. Yeah.
Theoretically, any animal trample another animal.
Yeah.
Cow is a different thing. The Torah says that these are kosher. That's it, except for the Chazon Ish. You're right. I should probably tell you that. Okay, there is another shita, the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish holds, as explained by my Rabbi Reb Chaim Tversky, that due to the fact that we have these issues of blemishes in animals and sicknesses, so we also have to be careful about animals, that you need to have a tradition that it's kosher, because you may not know if this sickness is something that's going to kill the animal or not, and therefore the Chazon Ish holds that you cannot eat any animal, period, without having a tradition that it's kosher. The practical application of that is the zebu. That was a major discussion in Israel about whether you're allowed to use it or not.
And the giraffe.
A giraffe would also be a problem, according to the Chazon Ish. But most Rabbanim do not hold of that. Buffalo would also be the same problem. Okay.
Bison.
Yeah, bison too. Okay. So now we're going to talk about Tzar Baalei Chaim a little bit. Okay, so it's the last 2 pages. Okay, so Tzar Baalei Chaim, translating the words, is causing pain to animals. Now, as is in all areas of halacha, one has to be very careful in using English terminology and the colloquial meanings of such terms to applying it to halacha. One has to know what is considered causing pain to an animal, when it is a problem. The idea that we can never cause pain to an animal is not true. And like for example, even PETA, right? They also kill animals. Okay, you can look it up online. I did. Google it. Say, does PETA kill animals? It says they will take care of animals that need trouble, even if the only thing that they can do for it is to euthanize it. Okay, so even pita kills animals. So we have to know when it is applicable and when it is not applicable. So the Sefer Chinuch writes that the reason that we shecht from the neck is two reasons he mentions. One is because of blood; it gets out the most blood, right? We'll talk about that in a second. And the other reason is because it's the most painless. It will be very quick. And again, we'll explain this. If you look at the picture here. Sorry that this is not. I tried to find a good anatomical picture. I was unsuccessful.
You know that in Spain. Let's say I'm just picturing somebody who took an animal and you had somebody firstly shot the animal right in the brain. Would that be less pain than?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Is because in the non-kosher slaughterhouses, that's exactly what they do. They take a pneumatic hammer, bang it on the head, and you hope that it dies. But sometimes it doesn't.
That's different from shooting.
What's the difference?
Excuse me.
With a bullet?
Yeah.
Banging it or
that's what they do. A pneumatic hammer.
No, I'm just imagining a bullet.
A pneumatic hammer is you have a poke, like a poker basically, and it goes like this. Right? It's basically a bullet to the head, and then it comes back out and it does it again. So you hope that it dies. But it doesn't always. Again, the doctor can explain this better anatomically, but when you're going to hit the brain, that doesn't necessarily kill the person. In fact, there was a very famous case, you can look this up also, the headless chicken. There was a case where there was a headless chicken running around America for a while. What happened is you had a regular farmer somewhere, he wanted dinner that night, and he chopped the chicken on the head, and it didn't die. The reason is because he missed the pituitary gland. Totally. So he chopped off the whole top part of the brain, but the part of the brain that really controls a lot of the body's functioning was still totally there and intact. Wow. And somehow the cut, it didn't allow for it to bleed out, and it just worked out perfectly that it was alive. And he went on a tour around America showing this chicken, and it ended up dying because it choked. Because he didn't bring the.
Maybe you mean the brainstem because the brainstem.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the brainstem is what controls.
You're right.
The body, like the heart rate.
Yeah, I'm very glad you're right. You're right. It was the brainstem. You're 100% right. So meaning if you hit just the top of the head, it's not necessarily going to kill the animal. So in non-kosher places, you hope that the animal is dead when it gets to the chopper. Okay, so now if you look at this picture, you'll see carefully. You're going to have to look a little carefully. Again, I really tried. I looked through pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of Google Images, and I could not find a great picture of chicken anatomy. So, but here you can sort of see it. Now, you see the knife over there, and if you look at right next to the knife on the left, it says the trachea, okay? And then right next to the knife on the right is the esophagus, right? So that's what we're trying to cut. Now, right under it is the carotid arteries. And then if you look a little farther down, right above the carotid artery is the jugular vein. Okay? Artery comes out of the heart, vein goes back into the heart, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So now an artery, that means when you feel the pump and you're looking for the pulse, that's what you're feeling. That is your heart pumping. So if somebody cuts an artery, it's going to spur. Okay? It goes with the heart pump. Okay? And then the vein disallows the blood from going back. So it's also going to be coming out the other side. So essentially, the ideal is that you're both going to, in a normal cut, you're going to be hitting this major vein and major artery. It's going to bleed out. And now, again, the doctor can speak more for it, but if you cut both of those, I'm pretty sure that you're going to pass out very quickly, especially for a chicken so small, and you're going to have a lot of loss of blood. And it's going to be nearly instantaneous, and you may not even feel it if it's a cut. If it's a fast enough and sharp enough cut. So what ends up happening is basically before the shechita, the animal is totally calm. After the shechita, you'll see a lot of moving around. That's what they say, a chicken without a head. But it's really just the nervous system, the electrical impulses. And I've been told by a doctor, he said that he has declared even people dead before with brain death, and they've moved afterwards. So that's fine. Okay, so again, it's forbidden to cause pain to an animal. It's a machlokas tanoim, whether it's aser d'oraisa or d'rabbanan, meaning from the Torah or rabbinic. And most Rabbanim hold that it is forbidden mid'oraisa. This actually is the reason that we're allowed to milk cows on Shabbos, because as the Gemara clearly states, that you're allowed to push off certain rabbinic prohibitions in place of this deraisa. So therefore, you're allowed to milk the cow because it's in a tremendous amount of pain, and you tell a non-Jew to milk the cow. Okay, so now, whether this is a positive or a negative commandment is very interesting here. The Rabbi lived around the time of the Arizal. Is actually, I think, the Arizal Rebbe. He says that it's actually neither. So it's neither a positive and asay nor a losa asay. Now that has specific technical meanings, and because of this, therefore there may be certain leniencies to this than other places. For example, if a person it's the classic case of causing pain to an animal from the Torah is if you see an animal buckling under the load that's on its back, so you have to help it. Certain people don't have to. If it's called, he's a zakin lefi kvodo, it's anal lefi kvodo. If he's an honorable person, whether a Torah scholar or a non-Torah scholar, an honorable person, it's just not in his honor to help to take off a load from an animal. So then he wouldn't have to. Yeah, well, that's by Hashav Zaveda. But yeah. Also, we can read this inside, but here the Chinuch says earlier. He says, yeah. So he says here towards the end, he says, Kadesh lo nitzar ba'al chaim yosem yidai. You shechted with, it's about the third line from the bottom. You do want to shecht it from the neck so that it shouldn't be paying too much. Ki haTorah hitira la'adam l'ma'alaso lizon man u'chot sarchad. Because a person is more elevated than the animal kingdom, so he is allowed to use the animals for its purposes. So that it's clear. If you have a purpose in painting this animal clearly for that person's purpose, it is permitted. No questions. So that would mean, right, a thing that comes up would be, like experimenting on animals to try to figure out if medicine is deadly for a person. I can't think of any purpose greater than to help save people's lives. So that would be permitted. That would be okay. Okay. And now, where exactly does this idea come from? So Moshe Feinstein says that by fact that we're allowed to kill animals not only for our own purposes, but even for non-Jews. If a non-Jew wants meat and we come and kill it for him, that's totally fine. Well, what am I getting out of that? It's only for him. It has no benefit to me. So he says, you see clearly here that it's not just that I can't hurt an animal, but as long as I have a positive purpose for it, so then that would be okay. A question of whether there's an isser prohibition of painting an animal when killing it, like I'm just going to kill the animal. So, for example, if somebody sees a dangerous bug in their house or something, or a non-dangerous bug, and it's just like, I'm going to kill that bug, right? So am I allowed to do that? So it's a discussion. And the Noda B'Yehuda, one of the great posek of Prague, Landau, lived around the 1700s. So he says, he just says it, that when you're killing something, it can't be a problem of painting it. You're just killing it. Other Rabbanim say that as long as it still needs to have a purpose. Once you have a purpose for it, so then you're allowed to kill it. Obviously, the Chinuch seemingly would say that when you're killing it, you should try to kill it in the nicest way possible, which might mean that, for example, those mouse traps that are glue and then just sort of get stuck there and then starve to death may be questionable. Ask your local Orthodox rabbi. But yeah.
Or exterminators.
Or the exterminator. Yeah. So those are some of the basics ideas. Again, there's a lot more to be discussed about this and Tzar Ba'alei Chaim in general. But I hope if anybody has any other questions, please let me know. And yeah, have a good rest of your Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Now, just.